Okay, just finished with the tuning. Going to make a quick video update for you here, and then my findings on the instrument. So I will look up the serial number for you, but just based on the cabinet and components of the instrument, I would put this piano from 1908 to 1912, somewhere in there. So this is a sunset piano or a grandma piano, and we call it a grandma piano because if grandma has lived to be 110 years old smoking cigars every day, just let her. So there's always going to be some clicking, rattling, rubbing, knocking going on in the instrument that it is ill-advised to do anything about. Less is more for this piano. Just to put that in perspective, you could spend more rebuilding a 100-year-old piano than on a brand new grand piano. And there's pluses and minuses, caveats to that remark. The quality of wood stock in an old piano is far superior to anything available today. The quality of craftsmanship, they're all hand built as a matter of pride by a team of workers who work together their whole life. So there's a lot that old pianos have going for them that new machine built pianos simply don't have. And for that reason, some people do choose to rebuild old pianos and they put the money into it and the piano will last another 100 years. You're not going to get a piano born in 2021 that will be here 100 years from now. They're just not designed for that kind of longevity. Part of that is computer design, but in the heyday of pianos, there was not a computer telling them how much wood, how much metal, just what won't break. And what sounds good were the parameters. So that being said, the three major components of the piano that we're going to concern ourselves with at first are the soundboard, the pin block, and the bridge. So when you hear the piano, you don't hear the wire. The wire does not move enough air. This piano, I would guess, when it's in tune, is holding 14 or more tons of pressure on the wire. And that tension is being measured in two directions. There's a tug of war on the wire, and there's down-bearing force on the wire. So that tug of war, the tension from that, transferred via the down-bearing through the bridge is how we hear the soundboard on the piano. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. The soundboard of your piano does have some cracks in it. I'm going to take the camera down there and show them, but I won't be able to see what I'm doing because I'm using the forward-facing camera. So I'll send you some still photos of those cracks later in case it's not clear on the video. And I want to talk really briefly before we go on the soundboard tour about the pin block. So the wire is wrapped around a finely threaded screw of which we only see an inch. There's another 2 inches of that driven into a rock maple pin block. And the pin block is, again, the quality of wood available when this piano was built is absolutely superior to what's available now. But the pin block is not just one beautiful piece of maple, because even if it was the most pristine piece of maple and you started drilling holes in it and then jamming tuning pins in, it would just crack along the grain. So your pin block is actually made of many different laminations of maple. The Steinway patent is 7 laminations, so this is something similar to that, where there's multiple layers of maple and they're going in different directions because the wood has a better end grip than it does through grip as far as grain is concerned. So the pins going through these multiple laminations of maple at some point begin to fatigue, but because it's not one piece, it's not immediately a crack. So you can have a crack in one lamination, but good grip on another. So your tuning pins are pretty tender. They're, again, for its age, it's amazing. But for comparison, as far as inch pounds of pressure, it is tender in some areas, some of which may not hold when we get into the really Arctic dry weather. So the climate has shifted that now autumn is later and longer and wetter, and you know our December has just been a humidity roller coaster. It was 60 degrees a week ago. And so the temperature of the air really affects how much moisture it can hold. And so when we get into January and it's negative 20 outside, it is going to be Arctic dry. And at that point, the wood of the piano will be forced to outgas. So the piano still thinks it's alive. It shares moisture with the air. All summer long, it drinks up moisture. All winter long, it's forced to outgas. We'll talk about that. I'm going to circle back to the pin block. So some of these tuning pins are tender by comparison with their neighbors. I didn't mark any of them. The objective of today's tuning was basically get the piano to tension without breaking any wires. And she did amazing. It's remarkable that a piano of this age will go all the way to A440. The pins at some point will need to be treated with what is essentially a super thin super glue. It's called CA glue, and it is not strong enough to glue anything in place. But we put a couple drops where the pin meets the plate, capillary action draws it in, and then the next time we move that pin, the glue breaks off and fills in the cracks of those laminations. So as far as fatigue on the pin block, not terribly expensive, not terribly time consuming, something that we would do as the piano needs it. And we kind of want to see it at its worst so we know which pins really need it. So that's the pin block. Back to the soundboard for a minute. So the soundboard is the speaker, and that's what's moving the air. The soundboard of every piano is a crown. On a grand, it's like an arched ceiling. On an upright, it's like a belly pushing out. And it's designed to be at a very specific curvature under that tremendous amount of downbearing from the strings. And when the piano hasn't been tuned in a long time, like this piano, or has gone through a recent move, like this piano, the soundboard is not sitting in the desired curvature. So the downbearing tension is insufficient, and the soundboard sits in an exaggerated posture. And then as I go through and tune today, I'm pushing down here, and then I'm pushing down there, and we're really increasing the downbearing on the soundboard. And it takes about 3 weeks for all that tension to settle across the soundboard. And we were just at the very border of everything's floating on me while I'm doing it. So again, remarkable for its age. The piano probably hasn't been tuned in 5 or more years, plus the move. So we do want to let it settle. And because it's an old piano, less is more. We don't want to rush it. And also a lot of this depends on kind of the level of musicianship that you've got. If people are, just learning how to play and stuff, we definitely want it to be in tune because ear training is really subtle. Probably the most important thing and hardest thing is ear training. So we do want it to be at tension, but we also don't want to backpedal or open a can of worms on the piano. So let's look at the soundboard and the bridge now, and then we're going to talk about the touch response of your piano. Okay, so I'm flying blind here. That's a crack in the soundboard. Crack in the soundboard, crack in the soundboard. The bridges are actually in really good shape for their age. I don't see any or hear any fatigue on the bridges. So let's talk about those. Let's talk about those cracks on the soundboard. So as I mentioned before, the soundboard is the membrane, and that's what's moving the air. When you have a crack in the soundboard, a tiny bit of air gets through the membrane that otherwise wasn't meant to. So in itself, it's not the end of the world, but it can cause some follow-on effects. So you may remember when the piano was moved in, if you saw the back of your piano, the whole back of the piano had these diagonal slats on them, and those are called ribs. So the soundboard is very thin. It's only 1/4 of an inch at its thickest in the middle, and it tapers to be narrower around the edge so that it can ring like a speaker. It would just get crushed by the downbearing force of the wire without the ribs. And so the ribs are what's helping keep the soundboard crown and helping transfer tone through the whole board as well. So when you have a soundboard with a crack in it, when you're playing the piano, a little bit of air gets through the membrane, but the soundboard can start moving at different rates on either side of the crack. And in so doing, it can force the ribs, which are perpendicular to the grain, to choose one or the other side of the soundboard to move with. And the rib separation can cause a growling sound, like a wax papery noise. And it can be very intermittent. So today it's on these 3 notes, tomorrow it's gone. Next Tuesday it's raining and it takes up 2 octaves. I mean, it can be very humidity related. Rib separation can be addressed, but it's ugly and it's aggressive, and if it doesn't work, you've tried it, and there's nothing much else to do except try it again a little further away from the crack, which is less chance of success. Essentially, you end up trying to screw the ribs back to the soundboard. You don't do anything about the crack. In order to actually shim the cracks in the soundboard, you'd need an engine crane to get the steel plate out, and this would be open heart surgery. At that point, you'd be redoing everything because you don't do open heart surgery and ignore the lung problems. You're in there now. So less is more. And with an old piano, if we don't hear a problem, there's no problem. So a lot of this, can sound more doomsday than the audible symptom is. And so we're going to judge it based on the audible symptoms. So those are the major components of your piano. Let's talk about touch response now. So the touch response mechanism of the piano is essentially a miniature catapult. You're shooting the hammer at the string and catching and reloading it. You have to be out of the way or the string has no room to ring. So you shoot the hammer, catch it, and reload it. A grand piano is a miniature automatic catapult because it can reload faster. Your piano has pretty limited dynamic range. For the musician, you're looking for all the possible combinations of soft to loud. As the tuner, I really just want to be able to knock it into tune. I want to be able to hit it harder than you're going to hit it by playing, because I need to knock the wire into tune so you can't destabilize it. And the physics of what's going on there, the wire goes around the tuning pin, and then it goes over a pressure plate, and that's the beginning of the speaking length. It's this change of direction and part of the down-bearing force. So you could imagine if I was stretching this rubber band over my finger, there'd be a whole lot of stretched rubber band here and not a lot of stretched rubber band there. And the same thing's happening on the steel wire. So I use, ideally, the maximum force possible to the speaking length to draw out any latent motion. And that really lets me know that I've settled the wire, which we can't do on your piano because your piano has early let-off. So your piano is shooting the catapult too far away from the string. And for the musician, that's the most concerning part of that is going to be not being able to play it softly. Because for me as the tuner, I want to be able to add force all the way so I can really punch the wire. But for the musician, if you just give it a little bit of force, it can't cross that great distance. So dynamically, the piano could be improved, possibly. Because she's 100 years old, we don't know if the parts will even allow us to move them. So that is a bit of I wouldn't say a can of worms, maybe a spoonful of worms. Like a little bit of a risk that parts would break on us, and there's 88 independent adjustments that would have to be made to improve the let-off. Not something we want to do right away, but it is on the table. So knock-on symptoms from early let-off, besides lack of dynamic range, we have a bunch of bobbling hammers. Flying blind here again. See, this one is Gada-ga-dum, gada-ga-dum. So the components are not clearing each other. The hammer's hitting the string, rebounding off another component and double striking the wire. And this is definitely related to your early let-off and can also be related to your back check, your damper spring tension, or the motion in the keys. So we might do a little bit of exploratory stuff with the instrument where we clean under the keys and see if removing 80 years or so of dust can help with some of the components clearing. It's a 5-to-1 ratio, so if you get 1 millimeter more depth in the key, you're going to get 5 millimeters out of the action. So we may get some improvement by doing that, but again, this is kind of elective and depends on the level of musicianship that we're dealing with. Less is more. We don't want to ever do too much to this instrument because she's 100 years old and she might not like it. So we just want to enjoy playing it and try to make modest improvements each time we come around. One thing I would recommend to you is keeping moisture in the piano. So I don't know if you guys have a boiler that has a humidifier in it or if you humidify for your personal comfort, but I would definitely recommend that we either install a humidity control device, which is pretty expensive for this instrument, $550. It would be the biggest one-time purchase you'd ever do for this piano. The benefits being that it has a really good chance of freezing time, kind of keeping things in their current condition and making any other follow-on adjustments that much more stable, because instead of a humidity roller coaster, It's much more consistent as far as moisture change with the wood and the air. I can link you to that. The system is called the Damp Chaser, which is spelled with two P's, Damp Chaser. Excellent system by a certain school of thought. You know, this piano already has soundboard cracks, has gone through obviously a fair share of winters in its year. It was built in Boston, which means it's built from New England wood. So there is a certain philosophy that, you know, less is more, and we can just get away with enjoying what she has without having to put the humidity control device. If we do opt to not install a humidity control device, the old wives' trick for keeping moisture in the piano is to put many, many mason jars down here on all this free real estate inside the piano. So the piece of wood in front of your knees when you're playing is called the front door. And in your case, the front door leans out of the way. There's this locking arm. Let's see if I can even see it. Locking arm would hold the door on. We'll rotate that and the door would lean out. When I put it back on, I'll include that in the video so you can see how to do that. But certainly having mason jars in there that are evaporating water into the instrument will add moisture to the wood and thereby keep it a little healthier. It's not targeted. It's not going to get the piano to the amount that the piano wants, which is 41% humidity, but you'll never get the whole room to 41% humidity. In the winter in Vermont, your windows will ice over before you get to 41%. So what the house can do and what the piano wants is different, which is kind of the benefit of the humidity control system. As far as playing the piano, there's no problem playing it. What we've done today is that was the hardest thing that this piano's done in decades, I would guess, would be going through this tuning, at least half a decade. So, you know, remarkable that it held tension with the age that it is. The bobbling hammers are certainly problematic for the musician. We may be able to get rid of that symptom without really correcting the let off if the piano doesn't allow us. But we don't know until we go a little further in to see if there's wiggle room between the parts to get rid of a symptom without getting rid of its cause. And then the other thing that's driving me nuts, which is a little undiagnosed as far as its specific location, is the bleed through. So there's dampers on each of the wires, and on several places on your piano, we have 3 wires for each note, and the damper is missing one of them or is so deeply grooved from 100 years that the wire can still ring even though the damper is placed on it. That would be a good one for us to go after, just so that the piano's not just ringing and ringing and ringing after we play. Not something I have time for today, unfortunately. If you have any questions or problems, please don't hesitate to reach out. I do live in Heinsberg, so it's not a problem to come back anytime. And I'll talk to you soon.